Welcome to our listeners today. We have another in our series of obituary writers. It has been part of our purpose to establish an oral history of the route that the obituary writing has taken in our country. I'm Carolyn Gilbert, and I am in Texas. And our guest tonight is Adam Bernstein, who is the obituaries editor for the Washington Post. Adam Bernstein has had some marvelous training, and he is a marvelous writer. So we've asked him to serve a dual purpose this evening. We're going to talk to him about his own personal development as an obituaries writer and some of the things that he has to do in his role as obituaries editor. Welcome, Adam.
It was a very charming introduction. Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate it, although I'm much older now than when I first met you. So
we met at, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, something like that, at one of the early conferences for the International Association of Obituaries. Adam came to deliver a speech. My goodness, he turned out to be a great speaker that day and now has just done some marvelous work. I want to ask you, Adam, I'm always curious how people got into this line of writing.
I knew from the age of 3, and it had always been my parents' wish that I go into this field. No, obviously not. I got into newspaper writing in college because I won a playwriting competition, and I went down to my college newspaper to volunteer to write theater reviews. And once you work at a good college newspaper, they always suck you in and ask you to do a lot of other things. And eventually I became the features editor. I'd always been drawn to arts and entertainment writing because I've always found it rather lively. And eventually decided one day I was going to make a career out of being a reporter. My career took me eventually to Bakersfield, California. It's telling you where my career was heading at the time. No, it was actually a fine place. It was a summer internship right after college. I got a summer job at Bakersfield, California. And my parents, who were from New York, or at least around the New York area, sent me an obituary from the New York Times about the man who was credited with inventing the Zoot suit. And I was totally blown away by how much fun it was. And I'd always vowed early on in life that no matter what I did, it would always have to be something fun. So that it didn't seem quite like work, because there's nothing worse in the world than going into work each day thinking that it is work. So the obituary that did it for me was about a fellow named Harold C. Fox. And I went back a couple years ago to see what the AP version read like, and actually I found it. It just says, Harold C. Fox, whose stylized zoot suit was the uniform of trendsetters in the 1930s and 40s, died Sunday of cancer. Mr. Fox's wide-shouldered, narrow-cuffed zoot suit with high-waisted trousers and a long draped jacket was the favored look of quote-unquote hepcats, which they define as devotees of swing and boogie-woogie music. Granted, it's factually accurate, but it doesn't exactly sing. Story, however, that my folks sent me from the Times, the lead paragraph read like this. Harold C. Fox, the Chicago clothier and sometime big band trumpeter, who claimed credit for creating and naming the Zoot suit with the reap pleat, the reeve sleeve, the ripe stripe, the stuffed cup, and the drape shape that was the stage rage during the boogie-woogie rhyme time of the early 1940s, died Sunday at his home in Florida. And it goes on from there, but I thought, holy cow, to elevate a story in that manner, to really captivate someone as a journalist, but more specifically in an obituary, was the first time it really caught my attention that this was an art form more than just formula. And it got me thinking. I immediately volunteered to write an obituary in Bakersfield, and I got to do one for an oil field worker named, I still remember his nickname anyway, White Shoes Bowden was his last name. I can't remember his first name right now, but his nickname was White Shoes Bowden, and he was so good at his craft that he could apparently walk with impunity out into the oil fields with white shoes and without fear of ruining them. So I tried to infuse a story with the degree of flavor that I'd seen in the Harold Fox obituary. While it wasn't quite at that level, I still had a lot of fun with it, and eventually decided this was something I needed to pursue at some point. It wasn't going to be quite then, but a few years down the line, I was at the Post, and an obituary writer died. I guess it's rather fitting. And I applied for the job. No one in the world believed that I was 23 or 24 at the time, really would want to do this job. I must have been 23. That I really wanted that job and didn't want to, let's say, be Paris bureau chief. I just fell in love with the form. I thought there was so much potential to have fun with it. I love the idea that you could write about all kinds of things, not just, let's say, one individual beat, where you're only covering sewage issues or the city council or whatever. And I just love the variety. I love the idea that the obituary could take you anywhere in the world. You could write about a Chicago clothier who created the Zoot suit, or you could be writing about a dictator in Paraguay. You could be writing about entertainers in Hollywood. I mean, it was just limitless. So that was part of it, and of course, the big part was the people I got to work with, and I found that in the obituary craft, it's a little bit like the TV show MASH, where there's a wonderfully dark sense of humor. Nobody takes themselves that seriously, with some exceptions. And we were all just sort of in it together, realizing, we have a great deal of freedom because we're very much needed at a newspaper, but, we're ignored just the right amount. What I think is very useful to think about for people who ever want to try their hand at obituaries is that in addition to just sort of generally loving history, more than that, you really have to be, half of you has to want to also be a teacher, at least half of you.
Yes.
Because what you're doing is going against the grain of what so much journalism is, which is what happened 10 minutes ago in our neighborhood. What we try and do is have a worldly perspective on, in terms of the subjects we choose, but also use the excuse of the obituaries to try and teach readers something about a field they may not know anything about somebody they may never have heard of, but was significant in that person's time. And half the time, or more than half the time, I'm writing about people that I've never heard of, but they just strike my curiosity.
Sure.
And it's a great excuse to learn for yourself, but also to be able to convey to an audience, and often to your editors who want to know why you're writing, 900 words about somebody that nobody's ever heard of. Well, because, damn it, the person's really interesting. And that's all the excuse you need, really, to explore. I just had a story the other day about I think she was a 94-year-old surrealist painter who was the lover of Max Ernst and spent her whole life in Mexico, basically, after an early traumatic life in England and then Spain. And there's no reason in the world why you have to do the story. I mean, what makes newspapers good is that they cover the things that they really need to. And to me, what makes newspapers great is that they cover things that they don't really need to, but they think that there's some added value for the readers. And I think that story and our role in creating those kind of stories really speak to that kind of journalism.
I'm wondering, you write for a very prestigious company. I'm wondering if you feel a pressure in writing obituaries for the Washington Post that you might not feel if you were writing for a little town in Indiana or somewhere.
The Post has an international reputation. However, it also has a very strong belief of being a local newspaper. So there is a dual mission of writing about nearly everyone who's died in the Washington area. We write about 4,000 obituaries a year just on everyday residents. And these are not necessarily fascinating stories. They're basically resume obituaries. But the Post has a commitment to chronicling the lives of anybody who spent a considerable period of time in the area, regardless of whether they were public figures or strictly, church volunteers or Army colonels who never made the news, or as long as you lived a long time in the area, you get some kind of obituary. This is not what is my great passion, because these are formulaic, very quick kinds of stories. In addition to those, really nobody would complain. Nobody in the world at the Post would complain if we just wrote those and occasionally covered people who were super huge, like Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes.
But that's a weird thing to do for readers. It basically skips over the most fascinating people who die on any given day and leaves basically the New York Times and LA Times the big newspapers in England to cover the really interesting people who were not famous but create the sense of a wild world that we live in. I just don't want to give up on that. I want our newspaper to have some kind of ambition in its obituaries. Historically, the Post has really focused on the very local people, has written sizable obituaries about government officials of varying degrees of interest, famous people, and also people who fall into the sphere of interest of whoever happens to be the editor. My goal is to try and be more consistent about the people we explore on any given day, so that we're not just occasionally giving the reader a fun read and otherwise just being kind of dutiful, but to be as dutiful as we can, but also really tip the scale in favor of having a great read on any given day.
You do have this enormous responsibility because of where you work, of the governmental and historical relevance of the people who are in our country's government and military. And I know that you have to pay special attention to that. You've got to lean that direction a bit too.
Right. We do a considerable amount. I mean, really, thousands upon thousands. I think we measured in somewhere around 4,000 a year of just people who live in the community, most of them government employees, GSA employees, Department of Defense employees, local government employees, people who worked at defense contractors, people who worked at McDonald's. I mean, it doesn't matter. As long as you lived in the area a long time, as cafeteria workers, it doesn't matter. We write about you. So it is, in a way, it gives a real sense of community, and that there's a nice small town aspect to what that's all about. And local people like reading about local people, but the area is changing. It's no longer a place where a lot of people just spend all their lives. It's a little more transient than it used to. And think about the enormous number of immigrants who have come into not just in the Washington area, but throughout the whole U.S., particularly in the Washington area, particularly from Latin America. And it really gives you a great excuse to write about, for example, as I did, a couple of weeks ago, a very prominent Chilean poet whom I had never heard of, but winds up being one of the most highly regarded writers from Chile. And my reasoning is, it gave me an excuse to learn about it. It gave readers an excuse to learn about it, and it probably gives people an idea that our paper really cares about culture and from abroad in particular, that we're not super provincial, that we really do care about the world, which is what a paper of our stature should be about.
I want to ask you of some memorable obituaries you've written. Can you think of a couple that might be interesting?
Well, my as I told you, my background was first in arts and entertainment writing. So for me, my heart is always in people in the arts, because I just find what they do so fascinating. I find that often they're some of the wittiest people around. So for me, it's just pleasure, pure and simple, to write about people like Billy Wilder.
Yes.
What was a great line he had about when he wooed his future wife? He said, "I worship the ground you walked on. If only you lived in a better neighborhood." That's the kind of thing that makes I really find that through humor you're able to touch the most number of people, and so often with the lives of the of actors, actresses, they've often had a very dramatic career in and of themselves. So it lends itself to both drama and comedy when you're writing about somebody in the arts. So who else? Paul Newman was a particular favorite of mine, because I found that it was a rare case of really being able to get inside the head of somebody, where for me, it all came together when he realized early on in life that he just wouldn't have a long career if he didn't stop taking pretty boy roles. And it just made sense to me why he chose the roles he did, throughout the 60s and 70s, where he's always being beaten up and mutilated and defeated by the, larger forces. I mean, he's not getting by his looks. But the obituary was complicated, of course, by the fact that he had a career far beyond the realm of acting. He was, of course, a race car driver and a philanthropist and a salad dressing magnate. the thing was trying to put together a story that made sense about why he chose films. Well, he chose a lot of bad movies because the good ones interfered with his racing schedule. So it was fun for me to learn that just as a film fan.
See, I didn't know that. I've learned something tonight.
There you go. I highly recommend you read the obit. I'd say Robert Novak was a tough one to do because what really did he do that's important beyond the superficial, shouting TV shows that he used to host? I approached the story that way, where I wanted to see if, at least publicly, this is his reputation. He's the Prince of Darkness, and it was really his early journalism career that fascinated me most. How he got to be the guy that everybody knows as the raving maniac on Crossfire. I hope I succeeded. That's, I guess, somebody else can judge it. But I would say also that I happen to like writing about dictators and despots and also their victims, because I think that I imagine readers sitting on the metro, which is the local subway system, going into their day jobs in the federal bureaucracy, probably complaining about their stupid boss and about grumbling about the bureaucratic things they have to do that day. And I kind of wanted to present a story that would sort of take them out of their own lives and make them realize how lucky they have it. So writing about horrible rulers, about the old-time segregationists who used to rule in this country in the South, about people who were victims of those leaders, I hope is a way of putting our everyday lives here in Washington in a reasonable degree of comfort and security in a little bit more perspective. All these dictators, of course, are going to have their comeuppance, and it's going to be ugly one way or another. So you have to be ready. I would also, just to get back to another story that I am particularly proud of, it was an obituary that I wrote in advance for a lobbyist here in Washington. His name was Edward von Kloberg III, except that it really wasn't. And he was a lobbyist for every dictator and despot you can think of. Saddam Hussein, back when he was our friend, Mobutu Sese Seko, Ceausescu, Samuel Taylor, I believe, in Liberia. Those guys had the list. He was just a fascinating guy because he called up and asked to have his obit done in advance. He said he was dying. He wanted to meet. How are these things done? And I said, well, who are you? And he gave me his name, and I looked it up. And suddenly I started looking it up on my computer. I was a little distracted by doing something else. And I said, sure, all right, give me your name, please. And as I typed it in, the computer screen filled with things like the despicable Edward von Kloberg III, the reviled Edward von Kloberg III. I said, yes, so this is going to be a good piece. So I said, when can I meet you? And we met for a lunch, and he told me about his life, and he made no excuses for the things that he had done. He knew that they were terrible, but he basically was spurred by a career he wanted to make a lot of money. And he sure did.
At least he was honest about it.
No, it was great. He was very forthcoming. He had said that when Saddam Hussein was a client, and this is an era, of course, when Iraq was in the mid '80s, back during the Iran-Iraq War, we were funding the Iraqis. Somebody somewhere in some newspaper would write a letter of support for Saddam Hussein against the evil Iranians, and he would then bill the Hussein regime for placement of that, letter to the editor in Eugene, Oregon, or something like. Despicable as he was, he had his sort of cunning ways, and he was very honest about doing horrible things like that. And he was just a dramatic guy. He would walk into a room with capes, wielding a cane, as colorful as they come here in Washington. What happened was his name was really something like Eddie Kloberg, and he added the Van. He added Van Kloberg, and somebody said, no, it's better as Vaughn, so he changed it to Vaughn. And he affected this kind of Noel Coward character accent. Hello, dear boy. Even though he came from, I think, either New Jersey or New York. I can't remember right now. From rather not the elite. I think his father was a plumber for a New York apartment building. Anyway, so he was. There was just something incredibly compelling about him every step of the way. And it says, turns out he killed himself by jumping from the Castle San Angelo in Rome. He killed himself because he had run out of money after spending a fortune on plastic surgery to try and woo back his gay lover, much younger lover. Yeah, so I mean, right up to death, sort of the drama of the life. It's not something you come across every single day. So it made me. It's one of the stories that I guess I'm happiest with how it turned out.
We're speaking with Adam Bernstein of the Washington Post, and if you would like to see some of his work, all you have to do is Google Adam Bernstein. He even has some tips for obituary writers. I'm going to close this part of our conversation, Adam, and promise our listeners that the next conversation will be about your legendary friend, Richard Pearson from the Washington Post. I appreciate your time so much this evening. I know you're a busy guy.
It's totally my pleasure. I'm sorry to. It's less a talking with than being talked at. So I'm sorry going on so long about some of these things, but
you just have a unique realm of experiences, and it means so much to us to hear you talk about them. I really appreciate it.
Adam, Corey Franklin here. Any request for your last song to close the show?
Oh, how about St. James Infirmary? Jack Teagarden.
Oh, Adam, I must tell you that in my museum, my new job, there is Jack Teagarden is from Vernon, Texas. He was born in Vernon, Texas, which is the location of this museum. And there is a special exhibit of his trombone, of many pieces of music, of pictures, newspaper articles, and so forth. If you ever get over this way, we just have a ton of stuff about Jack Teagarden.
Oh, no kidding. I love Jack Teagarden.
Amazing.
What is are you in touch with his, does Teagarden have any surviving family?
You know, I don't think there is anyone there left. And in fact, I think the way they came by this was a friend of his family. And apparently the family let the friend take all these pieces of memorabilia and give them to the museum. But I don't think there's any family left there.
He's one of my musical heroes.
Hush your by, my baby, so cold and still. I love you, my baby, and always will. I went down to St. James Infirmary, saw my baby there, stretched out on a long white table, so sweet, so cold, so fair. Let her go, God bless her, wherever she may be. She can look this whole wide world all over. You'll never find another sweet man like me. Heart, 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 God is happy. Heart, 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 Mary too. Heart, 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 God's baby. Heart, 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 gonna get you. Now when I die, I want you to dress me in straight black shoes, a box-back coat and a Stetson hat, with a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys will know I died standing pat.